Good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. I'm used to doing this in the morning. We'll give it just a couple minutes or a minute or so before we begin. Let everyone get situated and comfortable. And can y'all see my screen? Give me a react if you can see my screen. Perfect, perfect. Loving all the reactions. Got a full house this morning, already 60 participants, so really, really happy about that. Great. Well, let's go ahead and get started. I want to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Franklin Gafor. Please feel free to call me Frank. I work on the TIA team here at the agency on student growth measures. I'm our student growth and assessment specialist. And today, what we're going to do is go over one of our statutory components, which is student growth measures. All local designation systems have to have student growth measures in place for their teachers to be eligible for TIA. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, what it means to measure growth, what does assessment look like, and then what some good first steps for you to take in implementing those in your system as you start to plan and develop for the application in the spring. Want to go ahead and go over some of our webinar meeting norms. Our This meeting, first off, is being recorded, and it can be accessed via the share file. Deborah's going to go ahead and drop the link to today's resources if you would like to follow along. As we progress through the presentation, please use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and we will try our best to answer them throughout the presentation. We do have a really full agenda today, so we're going to go ahead and spend the first 15 minutes going over our objectives, intro, and then our requirements for TIA. We're then going to get into each of our student growth measures, and we'll spend 15 minutes or so on them. And those are going to be pre-test, post-test, value-added measures, student learning objectives, and portfolios. Then they'll be followed by our next steps, resources, and survey at the end. All right. So what we want to do today is identify our key components of each student growth measure and use cases in a TIA local designation system. We also want to determine our enabling conditions for each student growth measure to be implemented successfully. And then lastly, we want to determine which enabling conditions your district has in place and its impact on student growth measure decisions. I want to call out what enabling conditions are. Enabling conditions are the prerequisite conditions for the effective and efficient implementation of student growth measures, or like kind of the factors that need to be in place for the effective implementation of TIA. So when we talk about student growth, that is our statutory component. We have to measure student growth. We don't measure achievement. So we're going to get into a few reasons in this section about why we measure student growth and why it's more effective when determining teacher impact versus just looking at achievement alone. In the graph here, we have student A, and student A starts the year advanced in their growth measures and ends the year with proficient. While they still scored high enough for achievement goals, they would not meet or exceed their expected growth target. Student B starts out the year less than proficient and still ends the year less than proficient. But that student did move closer to proficient and therefore would meet or exceed their expected growth target. TIA places emphasis on growth to tie back directly to teacher effectiveness. In this example, if just looking at achievement, then the teachers with the highest achieving students would be considered successful, even though their students regressed over the course of the year. Whereas with looking at student growth, teachers have an opportunity to have their positive work reflected, even though the student did not get proficient on an assignment, on an assessment. So what we're going to do here is compare our growth and achievement. And education has historically looked at achievement, but there are more benefits to measuring growth. Measuring growth levels the playing field so that some teachers are not disadvantaged over others. By measuring growth, we can directly match that to teacher effectiveness, whereas with achievement, the teacher with the highest performing students would usually be viewed as the more effective teacher. Let's go ahead and cross compare our bullets. With student achievement, we compare the student to the standard. Now, with student growth, we measure students' academic progress achieved in response to teacher practice. With student achievement, we document performance at a set point in time. But with student growth, we measure the student's academic progress during a specific amount of time. With student achievement, it does not factor in the student's background. It really is a one size fits all standard. But when we look at student growth, what it does is provide student data that we're able to adapt our growth expectations to each student's context. And then, of course, with student growth, what it does is it really focuses on the progress a student makes and not necessarily on whether that student meets a predetermined benchmark. When we are talking about student growth here, we look at our statewide performance standards. And our statewide performance standards are roughly broken down as recognized, exemplary, and master, with 55% of the students meeting or exceeding their growth target would typically be considered recognized. The question we often receive is exactly what are the numbers? And so these are the numbers that we want to give you for delineation when we're talking about recognized, exemplary, and master teacher. TIA has developed our statewide student growth performance standards, and this was done by taking a data set from many different districts, many different teachers, and then calculating that with statewide VAM. It was determined that about 55% of teacher students meeting their growth targets would be considered recognized, 60% for exemplary, and 70% for masters. Again, that's the percentage of students that either hit their growth target or exceed their growth target, not necessarily how much a student grew over the course of the year. If we just take a look at the example right here, we have Miss Sharon's class. She has around 10 students in her class. 6 of those students met their growth target, 4 did not. Based off this, Miss Sharon would be considered an exemplary teacher as long as she also met that standard of exemplary on her teacher observation scores as well. I do want to note that these averages can vary for the student growth performance standards, and districts would need to decide where to set these averages based on their local context. If you are looking for our student growth performance standards, you can find a link to it at the bottom of this slide. So now that we have touched on our student growth performance standards and why we want to measure growth over achievement, what we want to do in this section is talk about getting started in our requirements for student growth measures. We do have some questions to ask before getting started with student growth measures for TIA. We need to ask ourselves, how are we currently measuring student growth? What data do we currently have access to? Well, perhaps your district is currently measuring student growth with STAR and tested subjects such as RLA 4 through 8 or Math 4 through 8. Your district would have data for these subjects already. Then we need to ask ourselves, does the assessment measure what is being taught? We would need to get stakeholder feedback and testing data to confirm if the assessment is reliable. We also want to look at our teacher eligibility and engagement. So what eligible teacher categories and assessments are available for these student growth measures? We also want to know if they accurately reflect the necessary standards, and then how will we gather that teacher input? So there's a lot of things to kind of consider as we are getting started with student growth measures, figuring out which ones we want to implement in our system. So we need to consider some things, and then obviously, and as well as engage our teachers, engage our other stakeholders to find out what is the best way to measure that student's growth throughout the course of the year, so we can tie that back to the applicable teacher and hopefully make them eligible for the allotment. I do want to note as well, we have a resource for new districts. And so we put together our TIA readiness guide, and has a step-by-step list of things you would need to do to start implementing TIA, or getting ready to apply, I should say, for TIA, and then be successful with your implementation after you've had an accepted application. We have all this in the TIA readiness guide. There's a little place for you to write your notes in, and really, really great resource that we have available for districts. So encourage you to click on that. I was going to try to pull it over to this screen, but there is an issue with my computer right now. All right, so now that we've talked about kind of those questions we need to ask before getting started, we need to go over our TIA student growth requirements. Our student growth requirements for TIA can really be summed up in about two sentences. The first requirement is that student growth is measured at the individual student level and can be linked back to the applicable teacher and is contents and standards aligned. The second requirement is that the district application needs to show evidence of validity and reliability of development, administration, and scoring. When reviewing a TIA system application, districts are measured on their ability to meet the following five requirements. The validity of content is the content we need to ask, is the content valid? Can it be used to set expected growth targets? Do you have valid and reliable administration protocols, including training? Some of these student growth measures do require training to be able to validate and reliably administer them. We also need to ask, do you have a valid and reliable scoring system? Is it going to be done by a third party? Will the assessments be scored on campus? If it is on campus, what does that look like? And then the last thing we need to consider are what security protocols are in place. Star security protocols are usually the highest standard, and many districts do employ them, but there do need to be security protocols in place to ensure both the reliability and validity of the assessment. I do want to note that each student growth measure will have its own requirements in addition to the requirements above. When we are talking about student growth measures for TIA, they really come in four flavors, the most recognizable of which is pretest post-test. They can be vendor or locally created, and you can use local growth targets or vendor developed growth targets within the pretest post-test. There are four additional options to that. So four pretest post-test is broken down into four different kinds of pretest post-test. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. But it kind of depends on if you have a district created or using third-party tests or a mix and match thereof. That would determine which pretest post-test option your district is doing. There's also our value-added measures, or VAM, which compares the student to like students based on their past testing history and based on how the statistical model calculates growth. Districts can also choose student learning objectives, which must be aligned to the system at texasslo.org. SLOs are built around a foundational skill and assessed using a body of evidence. Districts also have the choice of using portfolios, which are ideal for performance-based courses like fine arts, and they get to gather student artifacts to compare against a rubric and then determine if that student met growth at the end of the year. So we have quite a few options here with our growth measures for TIA, and so hopefully we can find a good option for your districts today, or something for at least for us to start considering as we build our system. Now, here's a basic timeline for student growth measure implementation of pre-test, post-test. This is just pre-test, post-test, but it would apply to really any of the student growth measures we use. The first 9 weeks of the school year, what we're going to do is we're going to give that pre-test. If we're going to give that pre-test, and students are going to they're going to take that. We're going to start recording that data, and then also during that first 9 weeks, we'll go ahead and set that expected growth targets. I do want to note here that first 9 weeks of the school year, if they are doing a pretest in the first, if it is a semester-long course, they would need to do that in the first 6 weeks, but we can touch on that a little more when we talk about pretest, post-test. Now, in the last 12 weeks of the school year, the students will take that post-test. If they are doing an SLO, they're going to be doing that targeted skill profile, or if they're doing a portfolio, you'll go ahead and score those students on the portfolio rubric. And then in that last 12 weeks, you're also making that determination of meeting expected growth. With our student growth measures for TIA, we've kind of given a brief overview of them. And now that we've talked through the requirements and general information about student growth measures, we're going to dive into individual student growth measures to determine what are some key components or features of the student growth measures, what enabling conditions need to be in place, and what districts must do to plan for success in their TIA application, as well as what are some assessments or eligible teacher categories that may work for a particular student growth measure. I do want to note that this overview will not cover everything about each student growth measure, but what we want to do is give just a little bit of give a little bit of analysis of each one and then invite you back to the sessions that we will be doing on each of these individual growth measures in the coming week. So what we're going to talk about is the what. What are some key components and features of this student growth measure? We're going to talk about what enabling conditions need to be in place to ensure success. We're going to talk about how. So in addition to the student growth measure requirements, what must districts do to plan for success with their TIA application? And we're going to talk about who. What could be some assessments or eligible teacher categories that may work for this SGM or student growth measure? Now we'll go ahead and start with pre-test, post-test. It is by far and away our most popular option. It is the most familiar option for districts to use. Give everybody a few seconds to absorb this chart, and then I'll talk over it. Now, let's discover more about the pretest post-test options and some details and requirements needed for them. Districts have four pretest post-test options to choose from. Option one is the third-party option. With this, the third-party vendor is going to be creating both the pre and post-tests and setting those growth targets for students. Some examples of this would be STAR transition tables or NWEA map RIT goals. Option two now, it still uses the third-party assessments, but the district is setting the growth target, and this is usually based on their local context. Some examples of this would be giving a release star pretest. The district then sets the growth targets for that, and then when they do the spring star test at the end of the year, they go ahead and calculate growth or the difference between the two of those assessments locally. Now, option three, that is the district created option or the in-house option. The district is creating both the pre and post test, and they are setting those growth targets. And you often see this used in courses that do not have a common pre-test, post-test available. Option number four, that is a district created pretest with third-party post-test and the district created options. Often you see this in a class like 8th grade social studies or 11th grade US history because there isn't a pretest for it. And so districts will often take select items from an item bank to create a pretest. They would then set a growth target for the student based off the pretest and then give the end of the year star as the post-test. So with these four different options, we do have quite a bit of flexibility in our system that we can adopt multiple of these options. And so let's say you wanted to use star transition tables for your 4th through 8th reading and math, that would be an option one. So you would have the star would be creating that test. If we're looking at option two, maybe that's the circle test. You're giving your students, your pre-K students, that circle test at the beginning of the year. It doesn't come with district created growth targets, but third-party growth targets, but the district can set those growth targets locally for circle. And so that would be an option two test. When we're looking at option three, of course, that's like your district created, and you see this a lot in like 7th grade social studies, where there just isn't an exam that's like commonly used for students to take. And then our option four, that's the district created pretest, third-party post-test. As I said a second ago, you often see this in like a 11th grade US history class where the district will take some select items from an item bank, create their own test, and then administer end of year star at the end of the year. These options really do provide quite a bit of flexibility for districts to go strictly the pre-test, post-test route if they wanted to for their local designation system. All right, let's talk a little bit about setting expected growth targets. Assessments used for TIA are required to have growth targets for the individual student. We're not looking at a class growth target, we're looking at each student having that growth target set individually. And these can be done by the third party or the district. There are some third-party assessments out there that do not come with growth targets, and I'm thinking of the Circle exam or our industry-based certification exams for CTE. Those are third-party assessments, but they do not come with third-party growth targets. And so districts utilizing those assessments would need to formulate a way to measure growth. You also have third-party assessments that do not come with growth targets like NWEA MAP or Renaissance STAR. With that said, we have some options for districts to create their growth targets as well. And so we'll share that. We'll share what that looks like here in a bit. Or no, sorry, not in this presentation, but you'll come to our pre-test, post-test presentation, and we'll share a little bit more about how districts can set those growth targets locally. We do have a list of options here. It's our TIA third-party assessment options list. This list is something that we go through twice a year to ensure that the vendors meet statutory compliance. Now, it's still up to the district to determine if this is a valid and reliable assessment for them and their context. What we do is we just go and we see if there are if they meet those statutory requirements. Can it be used to set growth? Does it cover the course standards? And it really is up to the districts to make local decisions after that. When we talk about our pre-test and post-test enabling conditions, what we want to say real quick, just remember that the enabling conditions are the factors that need to be in place for effective and efficient implementation of student growth measures for TIA. One of the enabling conditions is for the districts to consider if they have the content knowledge to create its own pre and post tests. If you want to create your own pre and post tests, having that content knowledge and those experienced teachers or test writers on staff is going to be a consideration. Now, if you're using third-party exams or third-party assessments, the consideration is going to be funding. Does the district have the funds to purchase the third-party assessments? Depending on the pre-test, post-test options selected, districts will need to plan for administering assessments over the course of the school year, collecting data, and plan for school personnel capacity. And so what we're going to say is those are kind of the supporting factors. And so with these enabling things, these are what we definitely need. And with our supporting factors, these are the things we're going to have to make sure we start planning for. When we talk about that, what some steps the districts can do right now, and then what that could look like with implementation. What we would say right now is start reviewing your assessments currently used and identify if they capture both the beginning of the year and end of year data. We want to make sure that districts are having those conversations with their vendors or their test writers to ensure the assessments match the content being taught in the class. And then lastly, another big one is the district needs to make sure they are reviewing their calendars. We do have some issues sometimes. We're like, hey, we didn't calendar a day to do a pretest based off of the system that we chose in our application. So making sure your calendars are in line so that you can go in and implement immediately is going to be of much value for you right now when you're starting to plan. So as you start to plan with your pretest and post-test, again, go back to this slide, use our third-party assessment options list. It can be a great resource as you look through that and develop your system. All right, we'll talk a little bit now about our second student growth measure option, and that is VAM, or value-added measures. What they are, it is a growth measure first and foremost, and it can be used to measure teacher effectiveness for TIA. It is also an algorithm-based measure that uses assessments taken during the school year, and those results are then combined with other information to determine that value-added score. What it does is it analyzes students' current and historical assessment data on nationally normed or criterion reference tests like STAR and MAP. And then it also looks at the students' prior testing history together with students with similar testing histories to create a predicted score for each student. I do want to note that the STAR progress measure or STAR transition tables are not VAM. They would be considered pretest, post-test option 1, as they are measuring that growth in the course of that year alone. So again, pretest, post-test option 1, if you are using STAR transition tables, or STAR progress measure. Let's now illustrate how VAM is predicted. Student number 1's testing history is compared to similar students with similar testing histories. What the model does is it makes a determination of how did like students perform on average. Based on this determination, student number 1 is given a predicted score. The students who meet or exceed their predicted score may be considered as meeting growth. Testing history often includes reading and math courses for our nationally normed criterion reference tests, like STAR. We have some good news for districts as well. So this year, what we are able to offer is something called Texas VAM. And Texas VAM is very much like, it is VAM, so it's a VAM system, But what it does is it is a low cost option or a no cost, cost neutral option, we would say, option for districts to measure student growth. So it is a predictive model, but it only uses STAR data. If you were using other data besides STAR, Texas VAM may not be suitable for you. It was developed by SAS, Texas Tech, and TEA. And so this is something that is tried and true. A lot of research went into it. And it is, like I said, it is available statewide at no cost. If you're a TIA district, you have access to this data. Now, why it matters, it is reliable and comparable growth across districts. It does validate the teacher impact for TIA designation. And another thing is it includes science and social studies teachers. So for your science and social studies teachers who don't have a STAR progress measure or a transition table for their assessments, VAM will calculate, or Texas VAM, I should say, will calculate growth for these teachers. Now, we do have some use cases, and so districts could use it as a primary SGM, so they could say that's VAM plus their teacher observations. Or they could use it as a supplemental validator, and we see a lot of this happening. So they may make it a weighted component, or they may just use it as an additional component to make sure like that their MAP or iReady data is in line with the statewide performance standards. Some key considerations with this for districts are it does only, yes, sorry, SGM is student growth measure, my bad. So if you hear me say SGM, that definitely means student growth measure. With our key considerations, it is STAR only coverage, like we said earlier. Only those STAR courses are covered. The roster accuracy is going to be based off the February snapshot date, which I won't get into much right now, but we have to kind of base that on the February snapshot. And then one of the things that districts also have to consider is that that data is not available until mid-September. So it's going to be mid-September the following school year after all those students go home and then they're back in the class for the fall semester. That's kind of when that available becomes available. Oh, and then lastly, it does adjust for those Spanish assessments. So if you want to start testing your students in those Spanish speaking courses that are assessing in Spanish, it will adjust for that. It also adjusts for the students going from English or Spanish to English assessments. Would encourage you to read through our value added model guidance. It is a great, again, no cost option for our STAR districts. All right, so after now I'm done with the sales pitch, let's go ahead and go back to our example. And so if we look at this example for VAM right here, we have Miss Bluebonnet's class. And now they were measured using the VAM model. Now students had their expected growth scores in the first column and then their actual score in the second column. And then the determination of if growth was met in the third column. According to this analysis, it looks like about 60% of the students are either met or exceeded their expected growth target for Ms. Bluebonnet's class. And we looked at that in conjunction with our statewide performance standards. That would be roughly, probably, it would definitely be a recognized teacher, maybe higher, as long as those teacher observation scores validated or correlated with that student growth data. Now, when we look at teacher categories that align with VAM, it is going to be the courses with access to historical data and courses that have nationally normed or criterion reference tests. Our enabling conditions for VAM, it is going to take district funding. If you want to hire a statistician or a third party to do it, Texas VAM, as I said earlier, that is a no-cost option for districts. But if you are wanting to test more than just your STAR subjects, that would be something the district would have to take on its own. And that's usually done by hiring a statistician to create a local model or contracting with a third-party vendor. The other enabling condition that you're going to need is access to your students' testing history for STAR and other nationally normed criterion reference tests. And then we'll just close it out with our Texas VAM considerations. So again, this is kind of a new product that it's been around for a while. We used it to validate your data, sorry, here at the agency when we're making those eligibility determinations. But again, it is now available to all districts. If you are considering it, that data is available in mid-September. So your district would need to assess if this timeline fits your decision-making and planning cycles. Again, the other consideration, cost neutral, so no charge. And Texas VAM supports STAR-tested courses, including science and social studies. So a lot of good reasons to use Texas VAM or VAM in general if you're looking to do a statistical model to measure that student growth and teacher performance. All right. Our next student growth measure is going to be our student learning objectives, or SLOs. Good. I'll give you a few seconds to kind of absorb this slide. There's a lot of text on it, a lot going on, and then I'll walk you through it. It's not as intimidating as I think probably a lot of this looks with all these words, but there's a lot of great use cases for SLO, and so I'll walk you through what that looks like. What are student learning objectives? Student learning objectives measure growth via a body of evidence. And usually there's multiple pieces of evidence to support if students met the objective or not. It is focused on a foundational skill for a course. For example, third grade math, do pie charts and ratios, but the meat of third grade math is really in multiplication. So SLOs for third grade math would really want to focus on multiplication. It's tailored to the individual student as well and can be structured for both the highest and lowest achieving students. In conjunction with that, the growth targets are set by teachers and really based on the evidence of the course. One of the benefits is that it works for any course and content and it supports varied student work products. So you can have a project as a part of your student learning objective. Great for these project-based courses. This is the biggest benefit. The biggest benefit is that it does also serve as an alternative to standardized testing. As we know, standardized testing may not be the best for all courses, and so this serves as a valid alternative to it. Now, if we look at our SLO requirements, all of our requirements are over on the left right here, our general requirements for TIA when we talk about student growth measures. But when we get into SLOs, that also includes the requirement of a body of evidence for student work. So I do want to note it's not a pre or post test here, but actual student work they've completed with a minimum of 5 pieces of evidence. The other requirement is that it follows the current guidance on texasslo.org. There is an upcoming training for this in about 2 weeks. Would encourage you to come to that training to learn more. There has been an update to the system as well. If your district is looking for training, would encourage you to reach out to your ESC partners for your training times and dates. Now, which courses may fit best for SLOs really is a local decision. All courses and contents are able to use SLOs as a part of their TIA system. Districts may want to consider the SLO option for their non-STAR tested subjects. These can serve as a great foundation for measuring growth. The enabling conditions for student learning objectives are strong campus level administrator capacity. Campus level administrators are highly involved in the process, going hand in hand with strong campus level administrator capacity. We also need strong teacher capacity and involvement. Teachers really formulate this process every step of the way. So having the capacity to be able to implement this is definitely an enabling condition. Another enabling condition is going to be district funding and capacity to receive and implement the required training. Again, reach out to your ESC partners for training opportunities. And we will have that SLO specific webinar in October. We do have some dates listed at the end of this slideshow if you're interested in joining and learning more about SLOs. Next, we come to portfolios for TIA. What are portfolios for TIA? Portfolios are a collection of student academic work. These can be tasks, assignments, projects, performances that are scored against a rubric to measure student growth. For instance, Miss Jones, she has a choir class and she has students complete a performance, and the video of the performance is then stored in that student's portfolio. They would then look at that video later to measure the growth. Or perhaps Mr. Rodriguez's computer science class uses student-created programs such as student-created programs as the artifacts to be collected for the portfolio. There are many different things that could go into a portfolio system. Now, there are 3 different types of portfolios for TIA, and we're focusing on the assessment portfolio, which is aligned to skill proficiency. It's not a collection of works in progress like a working portfolio or a display portfolio, which is the student's best work. There's making some confusion over some of the differentiating factors between portfolios and SLOs. And so what we would say the biggest difference between portfolios and SLOs is going to be SLOs are highly structured. It's basically a highly structured portfolio. Let's go ahead and go to our next slide. with our requirements for TIA. When we're talking about our requirements for TIA with portfolios, in addition to our overall requirements, there are some unique ones. And number one is the development of a quality skill progression rubric with at least 4 levels. TIA is also looking for clear guidelines for student artifacts. This revolves around the design of student projects, tasks, or performances that will measure the skill levels. Student artifacts and strong protocols around administration and scoring using their rubric. Artifact requirements for portfolios. There are some additional artifact requirements for portfolios as well. Now, remember, artifacts are the assessments, projects, or work products that are designed to go into the portfolio. Artifact requirements for portfolios include that they need to specify what skill proficiencies are acquired across a variety of proficiency levels. They also need to specify what the student must be able to demonstrate. And lastly, include a rubric that describes what various levels of proficiency look like for all aspects of the task. I do want to note, portfolio measures student growth along a skill progression rubric with several proficiency levels. Quick example of end of year performance levels. This is how they are kind of determined in a portfolio system. When we look at the beginning of the year, this student, and I will get my pen out, this student right here, in this particular skill, they said further review needed, but that student did not basically meet their expected growth target. At the end of the year, they set a growth target for the student at partial proficiency. So we're at this part, sorry, somewhat proficient. That would be the growth target for the student. Over the course of the year, that student was able to grow from significantly limited proficiency to somewhat proficient in this domain. Would encourage you to also come to our portfolio session. We're going to go into a deep dive on how you're going to measure growth with that rubric, what are the factors you're going to look for. So there's a lot more to it than this. Remember, this is an overview, and you are encouraged to come to the content-specific sessions for each student growth measure. So what content and courses can align with portfolios? Well, they can be used in all classes, but we do see them being highly effective in our performance-based classes. We've seen districts utilizing portfolios with great success in CTE. Welding classes can take pictures of welds that students have made for artifacts. Fine and performing arts also really lend themselves well to portfolios. Choir performances or student artwork can be compared against a rubric to measure growth. We've also seen some early childhood education programs utilize portfolios to accurately measure student growth and performance. And lastly, special education can also be a great fit, as the portfolio could be designed using an IEP, those IEP academic goals, to tailor the learning experience to the student. Most districts use district-created rubrics with inputs from ESCs and other partners. The portfolio enabling conditions include if the district has the content knowledge to create its own skill progression rubrics. This is a pretty involved process, and so experienced teachers are going to be more apt to complete this process. In addition to that, strong campus level administrator capacity and strong teacher capacity are going to be required. Teachers are going to be creating this system. They are going to be securing these artifacts. Campus level administrators will hopefully be the ones that will be scoring some of these. They will definitely be overseeing the process and progress monitoring along the way. These are the enabling conditions to have a valid, reliable, and successful portfolio system. For those districts who are interested in portfolios or SLOs, we do have a statewide service. It is through Region 1. It's called the SLO Portfolio Hub. What they do is they offer training and support. They're going to help you with, they do application. They can even help you with some data management. This is a service that is provided by the state of Texas, contracted through ESC1. So you do not have to be an ESC1 to utilize these services. If you're interested in picking up portfolios or SLOs for this application cycle, would encourage you to fill out the service and interest form and send them an email at ESC1. One other note, ESC1 will be presenting the SLO and portfolio specific sessions to the statewide audience this year. So again, those will be over the course of the next 3 weeks. Would encourage you to join those sessions as well. Okay, now we're going to get into our enabling factors. And in this section, we're going to compare the growth models and then try to determine, we'll spend a few minutes on it and try to determine what are some of the enabling factors that we have in place in our district. And what we want to do is see which one of these sessions we may want to come to, or multiple sessions we want to come to. We're trying to determine where are we ready to go, and then where do we want to maybe secure some of our systems or build up some of our systems to support successful implementation and the application for TIA. When we are looking at the option one, pre-test, post-test, remember that is our third-party option. The third party is creating both the pre and post-test and also setting the growth target for the students. And so some potential roadblocks could be funding. Funding could be an issue. Also, the district capacity for beginning of the year preparation. That's another issue. So if you don't have a lot of capacity at the beginning of the year, like do some of these assessments, or the calendars doesn't work, maybe that's not the best option. Maybe picking up VAM or one of the other ones could be a better option for you. When we're looking at pretest, post-test option two, that is going to be the district's capacity to set that growth and then calculate that growth at the end of the year, since the vendor will not be doing it for you. And then, of course, again, funding can be an issue where you do have to purchase some of these assessments that you're seeing once you start expanding your system out beyond STAR. There are a lot of options out there for you, though. With our pre-test, post-test option three, the same as the other two options, those same enabling conditions, but we're going to be looking at both strong content knowledge at that district level to create the test, and then the strong campus level administrator capacity to oversee that administration. With SLOs, there's quite a few items that are ticked in this. So you do need comprehensive supports to be able to do SLO and to do it well. But the good news is there's a lot of districts that are doing SLO and doing it well, and it's not as big of a lift as you may think it is. Now with VAM, the potential roadblock is going to be funding, especially if you're looking to calculate growth for those non-STAR tested courses. And then with portfolios, it kind of mirrors the SLO. There are some requirements that do need to be met for that. The good thing about portfolios is there's not a required training for it, and so districts can kind of use the information we have put out and start developing a system for that locally. We do have some next steps for districts to consider as they are building out their system. What we'd like you to do is consider the enabling factors to implement your student growth measures. We would encourage you to attend the webinars for each specific growth measure and then start to gather your current student growth data. And you can go and I would do an inventory. Like what are they using to test first grade reading with? And what are we using to test ninth grade world geography with? And so they're just going and creating a comprehensive list of what are we already using that can really serve as a great starter as you are developing your system. We also ask that you assess your district's level of readiness and the key next steps for success factor 5 of the TIA readiness guide. You can find that TIA readiness guide. It's linked earlier in the presentation. It's going to have that step-by-step process for you to make sure you're ready in all the different components for both application and implementation. If you are looking for some resources and basically any question you have, it will be answered in our TIA guidebook. So I would encourage you to go there and bookmark that link. With our TIA third-party assessment options, we again have a pretty comprehensive list of the different assessments out on the market. So I would encourage you to bookmark that, review it with your stakeholders, your science teachers or your English teachers or department heads, your content coordinators, whoever the stakeholders in your district are that are going to be responsible for implementing that assessment. Go get their data, gather their feedback, compare that to what's on this assessment list to see if that's something that would work for your local designation system. Also wanted to call out briefly, very briefly, if I can get my No, sorry, I'm trying to pull the link over, but it's not happening. Oh, here we go. We do have some great guidance out. And so wanted to just take a minute and walk you through the guidance. Can y'all see my screen still, or did I turn it off? If you can see my screen, react. Perfect, thanks. All right. With with this guidance, we one of our biggest questions is how are we going to how do we add CTE teachers to our local designation system? And so what we've found is that there's actually quite a few options for adding these teachers into the local designation system. We know that there's increased weighting for accountability for CTE. We know that there's increased money and spending in CTE as well available to districts. And so a lot of districts are interested in adding this as a component to their system. And so we have this step-by-step guide on how to do it, how you should consider looking at CTE. The good news is, as I said, there's quite a few different avenues available to measure growth. And just real quickly, wanted to just take you down a career cluster for welding. So if you were in a welding, if you were in the welding program of study, the career cluster was manufacturing. Those first and second year courses, they often don't have like an IBC or an industry-based certification test related to them. And so what a lot of districts are doing is they're running a district-graded pre-test and post-test for these courses, or they're giving student learning objectives or portfolios. And those seem to be pretty comprehensive. With our levels 3 and 4 courses, you do start to see industry-based certifications being given. And so many districts have started to measure growth with those industry-based certifications fairly effectively. The other thing I would note too is that when you're considering building your system, especially with CTE, what we found is a lot of these teachers, they may teach multiple courses in this same track. And so if that's the case, districts should choose one course, like the one course that best represents what the teacher is teaching to determine if to determine if that's the best course of action or not. In addition to our CTE guidance, we do have some ESL guidance as well. And so both of these guidances were formulated with our partners here at the agency to make sure we are in line with what the bilingual ESL department and CTE departments are doing. A lot of great resources, and again, would want to encourage everyone to come to our upcoming technical assistance sessions. We'll have our next one on pre-test, post-test next week. I will lead that session. Now, as we prepare to figure out which one of these sessions we want to come to, really like to take a few moments. We do have a brief survey. It would take no more than 1 or 2 minutes. If y'all could fill this out, Deborah's going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat right now. We really are interested in just learning how we can improve. Your input really is going to help us improve our upcoming sessions, and all responses are anonymous and confidential. So if you could just take a few minutes and fill that survey out, and then I'll talk a little bit about our upcoming technical assistance sessions, since these are the ones that are going to build on today's session. When we the ones we're talking about, the next session that we're going to do is going to be on 9/24. That's going to be next Wednesday at 10 a.m. We're going to be doing our Choosing Student Growth Measures overview of pre-test and post-test. It's going to be a great session. We'll have a district panel there as well, so you'll be able to ask questions to experienced TIA districts on how they implemented pre-test and post-test in their system. The following Wednesday, we will, on 10/2 or October 2nd at 10 a.m., we will do our Choosing Student Growth Measures overview of portfolios. That's going to be led by our ESC1, Texas SLO, and Portfolio Hub. They're also going to have a district panel, and you're going to be able to ask experienced districts how they implemented and prepared to do portfolios. On 10/8, we will be doing our overview of SLO session at 10 a.m. That one is also going to be led by that ESC1 hub. There will be an associated district panel with that too. And then, of course, we are going to be creating a TIA spending plan on October 22nd at 10 a.m. So we'd encourage you to join that and learn how you're going to draft your spending plan, how you're going to engage those stakeholders to meet your statutory spending requirements for TIA. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the TIA inbox at tia@tea.texas.gov, and we will get back to you. Again, the recording of this should be up within the next couple of hours in our share file. So if there's anything you missed, please go back and check this session out. And you do have access to this deck as well. Feel free to use it. And I want to wish you all best of luck as you start engaging your stakeholders and building your system. Thank you and have a great day.